All right, well, we're in part 2 in this series, Relationships and Romance, and last week we talked really about kind of finding the right person, and what that really means is becoming the right person, not so much looking for the right person. It's about becoming the right person so that you're ready for God to send you the right person for you. And we talked about what that takes. And so if you weren't here last week, you can go back and get the video on YouTube. And this week we'll be talking about newlyweds and really more so expectations. So this will apply for anyone that's either married right now, wants to be married, or hopes to be married one day. And we're going to be talking about expectations. And really this whole series is all about putting marriage as a priority. America as a whole, I guess you could, I can't speak for the world, but it seems like for sure in America, marriages are just under attack from the culture, from, the plan of the enemy to just separate marriages, to make it seem like they aren't valuable, to make it seem like they're not important, like there's no reason to get married. It's just a piece of paperwork that helps you on your taxes. We can just live together and we don't have to get married. So we're talking about marriage this series and really the benefits of being married and God's purpose in marriage, and then also how to be married well. It's so much like, I feel like when you're getting married, like you are so much focused on the big day.
Yes.
That like you're not really looking past that to the next like 70 years
Right.
and beyond.
Right.
But then like you get married and a year or two goes by and then like 10 goes by and you're like, all right, like we're in this together and we have to be here for each other. And so we want to help everyone with that, because marriage takes effort, it takes work, it takes time, it takes communication with each other. There's a lot that goes into it. And for me personally, I've been helped a lot by different sermons that I've listened to on marriage, and honestly, this will help in relationships in general, because you might be here and you might be like, well, I'm not married and I don't really want to be married or don't plan to get married again or at all. And, this is going to help you no matter what relationships you have in your life, because really with a few minor discrepancies, most things that you'd apply in a marriage relationship will apply in other relationships. But so this series is super important because we believe in the family. We believe in you all. And if you're married, you have kids or whatever, we want to help you with that. And we want to share from our experience and from what God has put on our heart to help everyone in that. So today, again, is part 2. And we're going to be talking about newlyweds, but this will help also, even if you've been married for years and years, because to begin, we're going to talk about our hopes, dreams, and desires when we get into a relationship and when we get married, our hopes, dreams, and desires for what we're looking for in this marriage relationship. And sometimes those things maybe feel like they've faded or died years into the marriage and you just kind of given up hope for those things. But we want to revitalize your marriage. If you're maybe married and you're dissatisfied right now in your marriage, we want to help you in that. And we want you guys to have the most fulfilling relationship that you can. So to begin, we're going to talk about hopes, dreams, and desires. And everyone has them going into a marriage. Or if you're newly married, you have hopes, dreams, and desires as far as what you went into this relationship looking for. And Julie and I are no different. When, we've learned a lot in marriage. And honestly, like a few years ago, we used to do marriage series at the church. And I feel like, man, did we even know anything about marriage back then? It's one of those things where, we can teach scripturally from the Bible as far as like, principles in marriage, but having some experience, we're going on 10 years this June, having a little bit of experience has really helped kind of open our eyes to what it really takes to have a wonderful marriage.
Yeah, because, after being married for almost 10 years now, you go through things. Any of you that have been married for quite some time, you understand you go through things. Life has a way of kind of sometimes handing you crap. And so it's about like, how do you handle that? What does it look like on the other side? How do you work through that? And so I think actually going through the hard things that we went through, we went through a miscarriage that was really terrible. And so seeing that we came out stronger on the other side and we were each other's rock through that showed how much actually depth and growth took place in our marriage. Because like he was saying, really in the beginning of your marriage, there's so much more surfaceness. It's so much more like I was much more vain and more about myself and everything for myself. And so you see later on as you grow, those things, if you're really doing the work and you're doing it right, those things begin to fade off, that they aren't a priority as much anymore. They're not the priority for why you're married or why you're living and doing life, but that, you see, you can put that effort and emphasis that the Lord is your foundation, He's your rock, and that marriage, raising good children, that's more important than some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get to that part. That's okay. But to begin, like when you start in marriage, you probably have some hopes, dreams, and desires and things that you're looking for in this marriage. And so, let's just talk about a few of those, because everyone has them, different feelings on just about everything. When you get married, you realize, like, man, it's not just my opinion that counts anymore. It's like this is what I was kind of thinking we would do, but now it's a matter of like, well, what do we think we're going to do? And so you have to get on the same page. And if you don't get on the same page, or if you don't learn to put the other person first, you'll end up in trouble. But so, we'll go through a list of some of those things that you might be looking or you're hoping or dreaming for, desiring in when you first get together. And I know Julie and I, we had our own individual lists, whether they were really thought out or just kind of assumed, like, yeah, this is just what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so number one,
go ahead. Yeah.
Number one on the list is your house. You might get married and maybe you are like, yeah, I hope that I'm going to have this really nice house. I'm going to have like the 3-car garage, the colonial house with a white picket fence. And then you get married and you move into an apartment together. Yep. That's what we did.
Yeah. You got to start. You got to start somewhere. Yeah.
You start.
Yeah. I mean, also I came into marriage with $11,000 of debt from an abusive relationship that rang up my credit card. So for me, I was living paycheck to paycheck, just barely trying to make it by, thinking like, I don't know, one day it'll just go away. It'll just, that elephant, whatever, will just disappear. But yeah, so there's these expectations you kind of go into marriage. I also was so, growing up, I watched a lot of movies, a lot of TV, a lot of shows. So I was really, you don't realize how much it impacts you and your perspective on what you think marriage is going to look like. It's like, happily ever after. We're just going to get married. Life is going to be so easy. We're going to move in together and it's just going to be perfect. He's going to take care of me. So really there were some questions I never really asked. I just thought would just work itself out. And then there's other things that I had such a high expectation that he was just going to do all the things, So there's so many things beforehand that I had these expectations or wasn't asking the right questions.
So, right. Well, let's talk about these things on this list. Number one, the house. When we get married, we move into a house together, or into an apartment together, and we're living there. And there was perks, right? I mean, we didn't have to snow blow or snow plow, or we didn't have to do the yard work. Maintenance was included, and we were living there, and we're like, well, we got to the point of where Julie and I had to have a conversation, and the place we were living, it was called. It was Akeley Manor. Mm-hmm. And Julie and I, and we were happy there. Like, it wasn't bad for us. And we were like, but, I kind of was like, I want to get a house. I don't want to just keep paying rent.
Well, right, because it was like 6 years into it. Right. You're kind of like, okay.
And so the way that we've been living was we had been making enough money to get by and everything. Yeah. And I was like, well, we can do one of two things. We can either just the money that comes in, we can spend it on whatever we want. We can be the slumdog millionaires.
I remember you would say to me, do you want to be the kingpins of Akeley Manor? Or do you want to, eventually save up enough money to get a house? And I was like, well, I kind of like being the kingpins of Akeley Manor. Right. I could spend what I wanted. I didn't have to worry about, so that was really, it would be a running joke, back and forth through us.
So, and we had to have that discussion. And then when we decided, hey, we're going to get a house, it's a matter of well, are we going to get a move-in ready house or are we going to get a fixer-upper? And for us, budget's a factor, right? So it's well, what are we believing for, of course, but then what are we also, able to afford? We could get a 1-bedroom move-in ready house.
Well, we also
or we could get a bigger house that we got to fix up, right?
Exactly. So that was a big discussion too, where it was I would just be well, God's going to provide for us. God's going to provide all of our needs. And I was kind of living in a fairy tale land where I was like, these are my expectations on a house and this is everything that I want. And it's like, yes, you can use your faith for that sort of stuff, but you also have to have wisdom and to like actually take action to make that happen. So I used to kind of, wouldn't you say that I was kind of like wanting these things? And you're like, that was a long time of going back and forth. He's like, but if you don't have the money, you can't buy it. So it's like, all right, well, yeah, okay. So I think that there was some of that time, but you're right, with the house, it's funny now remembering back all of those things. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, because you might marry someone, you might think like, we're not gonna be working on houses. We have these other things that we're gonna do. And Julie and I, we ended up spending a few years now working on houses, and that was not part of our plan. But
right. So the house we did end up getting was the fixer-upper.
We've had 2 fixer-uppers now.
Now we've had 2 fixer-uppers. Yes. Uh-huh.
And so that's something, that you might have a hope, like I'm going to have a move-in ready house. I'm never going to have to work on my house. Or you might think my husband's going to do all the work on the house. And the husband might be thinking, I don't know anything about taking care of a house. I'm going to hire that out, So it just depends. Like maybe you grew up and your dad was like the guy that always fixed the things on your house. Or maybe you grew up and your dad or your mom hired everything out. So you have like these kind of thoughts about what you're going to be getting into.
So newly married, I'm like, well, my dad did that.
Right.
So you sometimes can put this expectation on your spouse that like, well, my mom always did this, and so I had to live up to Mutti, you guys. Like I had to live up to Regina very early on. And then he was like, because you really have to work through that. You don't understand 20 years one way, seeing your mother act and behave one way. When you marry someone that's maybe really different, you have to adjust your perspective on certain things and understand that standard might be different for who you married. So. Right.
So, pets,
Oh, that one was easy for us though.
It was easy for us, but maybe not for everyone. Maybe you get married and you're expecting like, I'm a dog person. Or, no offense here to anyone, I'm a cat lady. Whatever you're... Ginny, I was not looking at you when I said that, all right?
She can just feel it.
Maybe you're a goldfish person. I don't know. Whatever your thing is.
Right.
Whatever your thing is. And maybe your spouse is like, I'm allergic to all animals.
Yes.
It's just like you might have those thoughts of like, this is my hope. I want to have like a horse pasture and raise horses and whatever. And you're married a guy that's like, you know what? Do you know how much money that's going to cost? You got to get the hay bale. You got to get the vets. You got to get the shots. You got to get, and it's like, that's not going to be an option. And your whole dream is just like, I wanted a horse pasture, So it's like, these are things that you really got to figure out. You might have thoughts about the guys are like, hey, I've been doing this with my bros, with my guys, like for years. Every Monday night we get together and we watch Monday Night Football or whatever. We get together and play, Risk. That, if you're like me, that's what I like to do. I like to play Risk. Anyway, you might have that expectation and then your wife's like, but Monday night was for you and me. That's our date night. Or Monday night was the night where I always did this, So these kinds of things start to come up when you're newly married. And you're like, all right, well, what's happening here? Because I had these desires, but they're not meshing with yours.
Yeah, that's why that video is so funny, because it really is like you've done life or had such close relationships with your friends for so long. So they're seeing that as that. I remember when we were newly married, he would get around his brothers and I'm like, who are you?
I just became someone different. I reverted to my teenage self.
Right. It was just like, the guys, the brothers were all back together and this and that. And I'm just like, you're not like that with me. Like, what's going on here? So, right. So it was just funny how in the beginning, you've been living life or have friends. So in the beginning.
You have to figure out cooking. Who's going to do the cooking, right?
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, I love to cook, and Julia, she does some things that she really likes. She's learned to do a lot more since we've been married, but for us at work, where I was like, well, I can do the cooking, but it becomes sometimes an issue if I'm working and there's no meal ready because I'm working, and so,
I can pick up really well from Wegmans. Right. What would you like from Wegmans? I will pick it up for you. It'll be hot and ready. Yeah, Instacart, actually.
Don't even have to go.
Just
order it on your phone.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but you have to pay 3% more to order on Instacart. And she's like, it's worth it. And I'm like, but 3% more.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So you got these thoughts and things,
But I'm also like, but think of all the money we saved because I didn't go there and fill the cart full of things we don't need,
Right.
So you got to negotiate,
Pros and cons.
Pros and cons.
All right. So, what about holidays, family holidays? We're going to spend it at your family or mine?
Yeah, right.
I like what one person said. I'll just take 3 holidays and you can have all the rest. I'll take Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter.
Okay.
You get all the rest. Okay.
Right.
You can have Memorial Day, Labor Day,
July 4th.
You can have President's Day.
Oh.
You can
MLK
have
Day,
Halloween.
Okay. Yes.
Oh. Right? So it's like, where are we going to spend the holidays? Your family or mine? Of course it's going to be mine, right?
Okay.
You just might, because you might be getting married and you're like, well, we always have Christmas at my parents' house and we always do this on Christmas morning.
Right.
And we always bake cookies the night before and we always open one present. And then your spouse is like, I didn't do any of that, right? So it's like, well, what's happening here?
I got let down a lot for Christmas Day because the Germans, and they do everything Christmas Eve. So then Christmas Day, I'm like, what's happening here? You guys are just staying in PJs all day? Like, you're not leaving the house? Like, what is going on? For us, it was like Christmas dinner. You got dressed up. Like, so Christmas Day was the thing. But nope, not with the Thomases. So... Yes.
You had hopes, dreams, and desires, and I brought them crashing down.
Yes, I did. Yes, that's very true. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about religion or church? So you might be like, well, I go to church every Sunday. I'm there when the door is open. I'm involved. I help throughout the week, and you're like, I just don't have time for that. Like you're gonna have to figure some of this stuff out. You might be like, I am all in with Jesus, and someone else might be like, I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around the idea of Christianity and believing all that.
What are the kids? Yeah, right. With kids, like where are they
you
going?
You have to raise your kids then. Like, and if you're a devout Christian and you're marrying someone that's not, like, or you married someone that's not, what do you do?
Yeah. Before I got saved, so when I was dating, like I was Catholic, but I wasn't practicing. But I still thought, one day when I get married, they are going to be Catholic. They're going to be an Italian Catholic, and they are gonna love Mass. Although I didn't really like Mass, like it wasn't really for me. But so then when I get saved, I was like, I understood, the freedom that, like, out of somewhat that religious structure type of thing. And so, I'm so, like, my whole mindset and perspective all changed. But before it was like, my nanny converted my grandfather from Lutheran to Catholic, so that's what's going to take place in my home. They'll be baptized as a baby. So again, it's just like you got to have the talk on how are you going to form together then with your spouse. What's that going to look like with the kids?
What about your career? Who's working? Who's staying at home with the kids? I mean, maybe not when some people when they're newly married. I mean, we have friends that got pregnant on their honeymoon, so. Who's staying home with the kids? Who's working? These are things. Maybe you're both really driven and you both want to work. I mean, you got to talk through some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. What about budgeting? Budget or no budget?
It's a gray area.
It's a gray area. You might be like, hey, kind of like you said, like I just thought it was all going to work out.
Yeah.
When we got married, it was like, okay, you came in with $11,000 of debt or whatever that was, we can work with that, but it's not going to be fun.
Well, right? No, it was like right after, like he didn't say it before we got married. It was like right after. He's like, all right, we're going to work. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we're paying off that debt. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
I want to introduce you to my friend named
Right. At
Dave
first
Ramsey.
I was so happy. I was like, thank you, my savior. Like he's going to help me get out of this. And then when I realized it was, a little friend called self-control, I was like, I don't know if I like this drill. I don't know. Like, abort mission. Like, get me out of this. It was like, you got to put the credit card down. You got to say no to some things. But that's the household I grew up in. It was like, you got paid Friday, you went out, you spent the money, and then you tried to, towards the end of the weeks until next payday, it was like, nope, we just can't do some things. We don't have the money. So, there was so much freedom then when we actually, I joke about the budget, but now I'm kind of the one like saying to him, like, where's the receipts? We need to get the budget. I want to put this money in the kids' bank accounts. I'm the one actually now because I've seen so much freedom in that financially that it's like, you can say no to things. Like, I don't have to eat out all the time. I don't have to buy everything that I see. And, so in the beginning then we paid off our debt. We were very disciplined in the first year. It was like 9 months we paid off $11,000.
Well, we had bought a car.
We bought a car, so
we paid off $23,000.
We paid off $23,000. So it was like, before that, I was very spiritual, and I was like, Lord, just supernaturally remove that debt elimination, like make it happen, Lord. But then it was like, I would have just gotten myself back in that hole time and time again. I wouldn't have actually realized there's a better way to live, that you can have that financial freedom, until I met Jeremiah. And it was like, God knew what I needed, like to actually sit down and start to make that budget and ask the question, do you need it? Do you want it? Is it, or is it like, can you save, type of thing. So, I was so thankful then, and seeing the fruit of it now, and seeing that like I can actually set my kids up for a much better freedom financially than just, spending everything you got. So,
right.
Yeah.
I have so many items on this list, we're not going to be able to get through them all. But, parenting style, are you going to spank, or are you going to tell them that they get to be their own person?
Mm-hmm.
You have to talk about this stuff. Are you, how's that going to work? Okay, what for us, Julia is she's from PA, so down there wrestling is huge, and she envisions our son being like a wrestler. I'm like, no, I played basketball. Yeah. And the jury's still out on that one. We'll see.
Just let him decide.
Right.
We'll let him decide.
Yeah, but no.
I never expected my girls to be obsessed with horses and taking horseback riding lessons. So it's like, you have a perception or a perspective of what you think is exactly going to happen. But then as time goes on, you realize that love, that if you do have that foundation of love, you can kind of release some of that control and be like, they might be a completely different person than you, just like our spouse, that they might be completely different in their perspectives. And it's like, you don't have to try and control or, manipulate certain things, that you can kind of just encourage them to do what's best for them and where they feel like, their natural giftings and skills and abilities are.
All right. What about conflict resolution? Because some people are Italian, and they're very
in your face, yelling,
hand gestures, a lot of karate chopping, and lots of expression,
yes.
And then vocal, and then there's other people that are just more stone-faced. We're gonna have a conflict, I'm just gonna.
The silent treatments, those are real, for real. People, they won't talk to each other for quite some time, and then you think that then it's just all going to work itself out. But those are deep-rooted things that are taking place that if you don't address them and work through them, for me, it was more of I'm always going to address everything, super confrontational type of let's work this all out. We need to be on the same page, kumbaya. And then he's kind of is it okay? You're just I just need a minute. The minute turned into going out to the woods for a day, or something. It would just be avoiding the confrontation, because I could understand now looking back on it, I was very aggressive or in your face type of how do you not see this? But realizing I needed to work on a lot of the way that I communicated and different things like that. And there were things that he actually needed to start addressing that maybe before he was just kind of and it'll just work itself out type of thing.
So, what happens some people be we never argue. And hey, I'm not an advocate for married people or anyone arguing. But if you go into a marriage and you've never argued before, you might kind of have a rude awakening when that happens, because you kind of actually want to know how does my future spouse or spouse, how do they handle conflict? Because you don't want to just realize I married this person, they were sweet the entire time, and then the moment they get annoyed, they freak out.
Yeah.
You want to know that it's not that you couldn't still get married and handle that, but you're at least I know I'm going into this with my eyes open and know what we're dealing with. So
totally.
All right, but so the point is that we all have hopes, dreams, and desires when we're getting into a relationship. We all have different things that we're assuming. I'm assuming my wife, and legitimately, my mom, she took care of my brothers and I, 3 kids, 3 boys. We were a handful or 2, and she
Saint
took
Regina.
She
That's
took
what
care
they
of
called
us.
her.
She cooked, she cleaned, she did the dishes. She also ran a business. She did so she's just. That's why Julia's always teases.
Saint Regina was up here, so my bar was so high to try and reach.
So legitimately for me, this wasn't ever a conversation. I just assumed that Julia was going to do a lot of the same things, that she was going to cook, clean, take care of the kids, look forward to homeschooling, and all this other stuff. And it's that's not who I married. And so and not in that was not a criticism. not
I
criticism
will
at
say
all.
I've changed a ton, though.
Okay, let me
Yes.
amend what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, you totally have.
Yes.
You've definitely, like, you love those things now a lot more than you used
Yeah.
to. But like when we first got married, it was like I was like, well, you're gonna have to do all that, and you're like, me? I don't know
Yeah.
how to homeschool. And now look at you. You're like, running a
Loving
homeschool.
it. Co-op. Yeah, you would never imagine. So for me, though, growing up, it was that you went to college, you got a degree so that you had job security. So I was raised, I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know really how to clean. It was like, I like organizing and stuff, but my family was like, oh, rats, people are coming over, quick, shove everything in the closet, so it was like, that was the pickup thing. So for me, but I was different than them. I like to have clean, organized. You'd go to my room and you'd be like, this room is not like the rest. One of these things is not like the other in this house, type of thing. I was always like asking my sister, can I just clean your room for you? She's like, you're so weird. So for me, I liked cleaning and organizing, but I was raised to go to college, like to get a good job for security that you financially had that. So I didn't know those sorts of things. So for me, we're getting married in like church business, like let's do ministry stuff. That's right? Like that was my perspective on things. I actually didn't even know when we got married. I was like, maybe we'll have kids one day, like 7 years from now. When we were dating, I was like 3 to 4 years. And then as time was going on, I was like upping the year. And he's like, what is going on here? Like 7 years. I don't want to be like 40 and having my first child. So we had to really have that conversation. It was something the Lord had to work out in me because I was actually terrified to have children because I was afraid of that expectation that my kids were going to kind of fall short or I wouldn't be able to do it right. So anyway, but yeah, I think that there was a lot that had changed over in me, but in the beginning, it was pretty scary for you. I feel bad.
Sweetheart, we both had a lot to change, and
Right.
that's the point. Is like in any marriage, like the point is that you go into it and you are thinking one thing, but then you, with time, start to realize other things. So the point is that we all have these hopes, dreams, and desires. We all have thoughts about like, are they going to live up to my hopes, dreams, and desires? And so you already kind of mentioned this, but where do we get them from? We get those hopes, dreams, and desires primarily from the people that influenced us while we were growing up. Primarily, for most people, their parents. The way that their parents treated each other as husband and wife, the way that your parents treated you. And and then also, maybe from your siblings or your close friends, maybe you're like, I want to have a marriage just like my parents did. Or maybe you're like, I want my marriage to be nothing like my parents. Whatever the case is, you're probably influenced either in the positive or for the negative by the way that you grew up. Maybe you had like an older sibling that they got married and you saw the way that their relationship went. You're like, I don't want my marriage to end up like that. Or you're like, I've seen them do so well. I want to be just like them. And so you can so the point is that we have these hopes, dreams, desires, and they come from these places of influence that are from these relationships. Yeah. So then the question becomes, what happens when my hopes, dreams, and desires meet your hopes, dreams, and desires? Because she has her own hopes, dreams, and desires. I have mine. Mine is I'm hunting, during October through December 18th, I'm in the woods. But does that line up with my wife's hopes, dreams, and desires? So the thing is, we each have our hopes, dreams, and desires, but what happens when ours meet each other? And so that is most often where people compromise. That's like where my hopes, dreams, and desires meet your hopes, dreams, and desires, and it becomes a compromise. And really, in a lot of cases, it becomes a negotiation.
Yes.
Right? And so, may the best negotiator win, right? And that's generally what happens. There's one negotiator that's better than the other, and they tend to get what they want more often than the other person.
I'm like, so we got to talk about this. Let's talk. And each kid, I'm always like, we got to renegotiate. We got to talk.
Right. So how do you negotiate? There's 3 C's of negotiating that are all pretty terrible: convince, coerce, and what's my third C? Convince, coerce, and control.
Yes.
Those are the 3 detrimental negotiating skills that often go into a marriage that cause a marriage to lose that joy, that first love, that passion, that excitement. Like, I was so excited to marry you. When we dated, there was just like stars in the sky all the time, and it was just like complete bliss. And then we got married, and what happened? Well, your hopes, dreams, and desires met my hopes, dreams, and desires, and I want mine to be the one that we're doing, and you want yours to be the one that we're doing. So we gotta, like the polite term is, well, we just compromise, but really, compromise means one of us is getting our way and one of us isn't.
Yeah.
And so that becomes kind of like this negotiation, and maybe it's polite at first, but then after a few years, it becomes that convince, coerce, and control.
Yeah.
The guy might be like, assert their male dominance and just yell and be like, I'm the strong one, this is what we're doing, I'm the man, I'm in charge of this house. And if you're Christian, you're like, you gotta submit to me because God put me in this position of authority and blah, blah.
I pay the bills.
And then the wife's but like, you gotta love me, and like, so it's like, so it becomes that like controlling thing, whereas the lady's like, well, you might win that battle, but I'm gonna, manipulate the situation in my favor over here. And there can be this conniving and all of that going on where the guy's like being forceful and the wife is kind of being sneaky, and that kind of ends up, that's common in a lot of marriages because we're trying to get our hopes, dreams, and desires.
Yeah. In the beginning, sometimes I still joke. I'm like, all right, that's going to cost you $100. I'm going out shopping. Like I used to mess with them and be like, fine, get it your way. And then I would be like, I'm going to go, but so over time.
You used to say, what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine.
Right. I kind of stand by that. So.
I mean, I'll find my shoes, my sneakers, I'll find them in the trash can, and I'll be like, I'm using those sneakers still. And she's like, they're garbage. I'm like, I've had those since high school. And she's like, that's why they're garbage.
They're
I'm like, but they're sentimental.
The soles are disintegrating like ash on the inside. And he's like, I still had plans to play
Just
basketball.
Needs a new insert. No problem.
When's the last time you played basketball? So
I'm living in my glory days.
Glory days still, yeah. I understand.
So the negotiation can kind of become an extended negotiation, or some people might call it a siege. Like, when you're sieging a castle, it's like, we're going to come to terms here. And this started out as like a friendly, like, let's do your day on Monday, my day on Tuesday. But eventually, like, if you butt heads long enough, it becomes an extended hostage negotiation. And what happens in an extended hostage negotiation? Well, normally, somebody gives in at some point, and it could go on for days, months, or years. It can go on for some time, but there's negotiation, there's back and forth. There's like, hey, if you give me this, I'll give you that. Like, let's work out a deal, let's work out a compromise. And the thing is, in marriage or in a negotiation, like, there's a winner and there's a loser. And so that's bad. In marriage, you don't want to have a winner and a loser. And again, if one person's the better negotiator than the other, or one person's more forceful than the other, and we're just going to kind of force our way or negotiate our way, then there's a winner and there's a loser, and that is bad news for the marriage. So it's great news for the winner, but it's bad news for the loser. What happens when you keep losing?
Yeah, because, even from the woman's perspective, sometimes we can get very manipulative, that we're trying to get our way at any cost. And really, that might not be what's best for your marriage and best for your family, but you're so adamant and you're so sure that this is what you want to do. Like, this is what we have to do. When we were newly married, I was so convinced our kids were going to go to private school. Like, I could not homeschool. Our kids will go to private school. And he'd be like, have these other reasons why he would think no. And I was still arguing tooth and nail, like, our kids are going to go to private school. Like, I'm not homeschooling. Or it would be like, well, then you're just going to do it. Like, but sometimes, why are we trying to get our way so much? Why don't we just take it to the Lord and say, Lord, why do I feel this way? Why am I fighting it so hard? Because sometimes there are fights that are the nail in the coffin. Sometimes there are disagreements that's like, you're never going to be able to get back from whatever that was. You know what I mean? But that there has to be, why am I trying to manipulate it? Why am I trying then to be like, I'm out then I'm done, like if we don't get our way. So there is a way that with the compromising, you can both have what's best for the family, even if it's maybe not what you originally wanted. Now I'm like, I would never do anything but homeschool, but so.
And really, that's not a compromise.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. That's not a compromise, because really, ideally, compromising is not the way to have a happy marriage.
Yeah.
There's something that happy married people do that is different than compromising. And that's what we're going to get to here in a second. But ultimately, what you're saying is that you changed your perspective. It wasn't that you compromised. It was that your whole perspective changed, and that happened for a reason. So what happens when somebody keeps losing the negotiations is that eventually they're like, well, normally a few things happen. Normally they are like, one common one is, well, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to leave. I'm going to separate. I'm going to divorce. Another one is you realize there's no way out of this, so I'm going to go down and I'm taking down as many people as like in a hostage negotiation, like I'm just going to start taking out hostages, and if they're going to come at me, then I'm taking as many out with me, and this is going to end in a blaze of glory. Like, and unfortunately that happens not just in obviously hostages, but in marriages where it's just like, I'm just going to destroy this marriage. I'm going to start living for myself. I'm going to spend all our money on me. I'm going to like lie, cheat, and steal. They just get nasty with each other. And it's like, obviously you don't want it to end up that way. The other things that could happen is you settle, or you end up in a stalemate where couples are like, I'm dedicated to, or I'm committed to marriage, but I'm not really committed to you. Yeah. Like, I value marriage so much that I won't divorce you. Like, right. I feel like a divorce is horrible, but so we're not going to get divorced, but we're also just going to hate our marriage. Yeah. You know, and so they're more committed to the marriage than they are to that person. And we want people committed to marriage, but we want you to ultimately not be committed to marriage, but committed to each other because you love each other. Mm-hmm. So, why does this happen? Why is it that when your hopes, dreams, and my hopes, dreams, and desires meet yours, and yours meet mine, that we end up in negotiations? I mean, your hopes, dreams, and desires aren't bad, and neither are mine. Like, on our own, like, it's like, hey, that's just the way we are and the way that we want it. And honestly, if your spouse would just give in to your hopes and dreams and desires, they would probably realize that your hopes and dreams and desires were the best ones all along, right? I mean, ultimately, like, don't we all kind of feel that way a little bit? Like, if she just knew how much fun it is to shoot a 10-point buck in the woods, like, she would be out there with me all the time. Like, she just hasn't experienced that. But if I can convince her long enough, then maybe she, you know. Right. So it's like, ultimately, we kind of feel like if they just understood that my way was the best way, then it would all just be fine. But really, this happens because our hopes, dreams, and desires to me, and your hopes, dreams, desires to you are your hopes, dreams, and desires, but to me, they're expectations. So to you, they're your hopes, dreams, and desires, but to me, they come across as, these are my expectations. I'm expecting this of you, or you owe this to me, or you're in debt to me. Mm-hmm. Now, if I were to give you $20, you'd be like, thank you for this gift. You gave that to me. But if you owed me $20 and you gave me $10, I'd be like, okay, cool, but where's the rest of my money? Like, you owe that money to me. I'm expecting that of you. Like, you owe me this. And this happens in marriages where, like, you know, it starts off like, you know, where the wife is either taking care of the kids and the husband's doing the maintenance on the car or taking the trash out, and it just happens. And eventually, like, maybe the husband doesn't do it, or the wife doesn't take care of the kids, and they're like, hey, I just need you to take it. Well, it's like, no, that's your job. That's your role. And you expect that. I've started to expect things of you. You owe me these things. And that's where our hopes, dreams, and desires no longer feel like this is fun anymore. This is just all of a sudden there's too much pressure on me, and how am I going to handle this? Because, like, I'm no longer joyful about your hopes, dreams, and desires. These are just your demands or your expectations for me. And so the big problem with expectations is they become a debt. You owe it to your spouse. And so the question becomes, what do we do? Because ultimately, we all have our own hopes, dreams, and desires when we get into a marriage. When we're married, we want certain things. We want to feel a certain way. We want to be treated a certain way. We want to be loved or respected a certain way. And what happens when you're not getting it? I mean, that becomes the tricky part. And where a lot of people end up going is they end up in the extended negotiations, the compromising, and then it ends up kind of turning into a battle royale where you're just, it's however much I can get in this marriage, I'm going to take it. I'm going to, you know, if I can have, like, you know, I'm taking this time to go out to the woods, you're taking this time to go to the salon, and I'm just, you know, like, okay, whatever, you can do your day, I'll do mine, but really we're not happy about it. You know, and you don't want to end up in a situation where we're just like living together, kind of raising kids together, kind of just like taking care of each other's situations, but really we're not actually happily married. Roommates,
but there's no romance. Right. You know, There's no passion, there's no real love there that's keeping the marriage more than just like, this is our duty and this is what we have to do.
So what do we do? Jesus actually gave us the answer. He told us in John 13:34, this is right before Jesus is going to die on the cross, and he has, you know, a good understanding of the old covenant. There's 613 or so commands. In the Old Covenant, there's, of course, the 10 Commandments that everyone knows, then all the other ones. And Jesus says, a new command I give you. And that's dangerous ground because, for anyone living in that culture, you are allowed to teach the commands, you're allowed to explain the commands, you're allowed to have your opinions on the commands, but you weren't allowed to add to the commands because that puts you in the place of God. And Jesus is doing something a little bit dangerous here. He says, I'm going to give you a new command. The disciples might have been like, hold up, whoa, you can't add to the commands. Yeah. But that's exactly what Jesus did. And he says in John 13:34, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. Mm-hmm. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, Jesus raised the dead, he healed the blind eyes, he walked on the water, but what does that have to do with marriage? That doesn't exactly help me with that's not exactly marriage advice. But the key is that throughout the rest of the New Testament, you'll see time and time again where Paul and the authors of the New Testament, Peter, the different authors, they wrote and they constantly came back to this concept of, as a New Testament Christian, in any relationship, marriage or otherwise, it's about loving one another. Yeah. And so how does that look? Well, quickly in Ephesians 5:25, it says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So this is Paul writing to the church at Ephesus, and he's saying, you have to love your bride. You have to love your wife, just like Jesus loved the church. Just like Jesus is here saying the new command is to love one another. That's how Paul here is writing to husbands to love their wives. And again, I would take time to read. You can read this whole section of Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 20 or so. When you got time, read that. It goes into more, wives submitting to their husbands and so forth. And that kind of is can be a whole can of worms right there. Maybe next week we'll get into that a little bit if we have time. But so he also says in verse 31, it's actually a quote. It says, for this reason, man will not leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So you have to realize when you get married, the influences, the things that created your hopes, dreams, and desires, those kind of have to go away, and you have to form a new relationship here. It's no longer, well, my mom did the cooking, cleaning, and diaper changing and ran a business and do all that. It's that was her, and that worked for her and my dad, and that's awesome. But you and me, we're something brand new. Yeah. And we have to be you for me and me for you all the time. Yeah. So again, in this concept of loving one another, it's all throughout the New Testament, but how does it come into marriage? In Romans chapter 13, in verse 8, it says, you guys are probably familiar with this verse because often it gets taken out of context and it's, it's often used to talk about you shouldn't be into debt and you shouldn't have a credit card. It's not what this is talking about. Romans chapter 13, verse 8, it says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. Mm-hmm. For whoever loves the others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not commit murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. So here's the deal. When you're married, you bring your hopes, dreams, and desires into a marriage. It's not bad. But if you want to have a happy marriage, you have to learn to love the other person all the time. And what does that mean? You put them ahead of yourself all the time. Now, how does that work? It's kind of scary. Because if you're like, well, if I'm always putting her ahead of me, or if I'm always putting him ahead of me, I'm never going to get what I want out of this. And honestly, the scariest part about loving one another the Jesus kind of way is well, who goes first? Do I start loving you and then hoping that you're in turn going to love me? Because what if I just start loving you and I'm putting you first in every area of life and I'm just loving on you, and when you need something I'm there for you and I'm submitting to you and I'm taking care of you, and what if you never reciprocate that back to me? Mm-hmm. See, and that's where it feels like it's dangerous, but I promise you the Jesus way of the Jesus kind of loving one another, it won't just stay that way. I promise you, if as a married couple, if you just start loving one another, if you start putting her needs above yours or his needs above yours, if you put love, God's love into the marriage, then it's going to change the whole marriage. It's going to change the spouse. And not even you can't do it from a selfish motive. It has to be I'm genuinely here to love you, to take care of you, to support you, to help you, to encourage you,
Right.
to be there for you, to all of that.
Right. Like in the beginning of the marriage, you're like, maybe you're doing something nice and your hope is like, well, maybe he'll let me go out, she'll let me go out with my friends or whatever. Like there's a motive kind of behind it, or he'll be like, I did this for you. And I'll be like, okay, what do you want? But really nobody benefits more than when you treat your spouse like gold than you. Nobody benefits more, because when you're really, truly living a sacrificial love for the other person, it can't return void.
The reason the way that works is I'm like, baby, you just go out and do your nails, or you take time for yourself, and like I'm just genuinely loving on her. She knows that like I'm a hunter and I like guns and all that stuff. She's gonna, like, without even me having to ask, be like, why don't you go spend some time doing what you want to do?
Yeah.
So like we feel like we have to fight to get what we want, but if we fight for what the other person wants, they're gonna fight for what you want. And I heard a preacher say it's a race to the back of the line.
Yeah.
To always put the other person first, to always humble yourself. And in marriage, if you love one another that way, where you're constantly like, these are my wife's needs, or these are my husband's needs, or desires, hopes, dreams, I'm going to give them that. I promise you, if you do that, and it might not happen overnight, but if you just start doing that, I'm gonna stop trying to convince, coerce, control my way to get what I want. I'm gonna stop trying to manipulate. I'm gonna stop trying to demand. I'm just gonna start loving. I promise you're both gonna be so much happier. You're both, and again, it's kind of scary at first. It might be like, oh, if I just start giving in to what they want and helping them, and I'm not getting what I want, and I don't know how that's gonna look for me.
Yeah.
But I promise you, you have to try it. You have to learn to love one another, and then it's going to change everything. That's the Christian way of loving.
Right, exactly. Because the world makes you think it's 50-50.
Yeah.
We're doing 50-50 here, and then we make 100. But you have to give 100% all of the time. Like, if you're doing that, like, serving each other or whatever that you're doing, you're giving 100% all of the time. And the person, we always, like, it's funny because it's like the first person to apologize in an argument is normally the one, like, then when I apologize first, then it makes him reflect, like, even if I did 1% wrong out of the 100%, or it's vice versa, if he's apologizing for the 1% wrong that he did and really it was 99% on me, it breaks down that barrier, and it causes you to actually really reflect and be like, wow, that was so big of them. All he did was like, one little thing, but I'm over here throwing a temper tantrum, or something like that. And it makes you reflect, and it causes you to change. It causes you to change on the inside, and then to really see that love for one another that God's created.
So like you said, the worldly kind of love is 50-50. If you love me, I'll love you. Mm-hmm. The Jesus kind of love is totally different. Think about it. Jesus, what did he require of you before he laid down his life for you? Nothing. If you like, regardless of how you live or what you've done, if you live in sin the rest of your life or whatever, he did that for you without demanding anything of you. The Jesus kind of love is, I'm going to lay my life down for you regardless of what you do for me. Yeah. And when you learn to live like that in a relationship, when you learn to live like that in your marriage for your spouse, and you say, I'm going to lay down my life for you without expecting anything in return, it changes everything.
Yeah.
That's all the time we have for. Let's pray.
Yeah.
Father, I thank you for your word. I pray that this takes hold of our hearts. I pray for every single married couple, whether they've been married for a month or 2 or 10 years or 50 years, or whether they're planning to get married or want to get married, whatever it is, Father, I pray that you help us to develop this Jesus kind of love to where we can love one another without any expectation in return, where we're not expecting anything from anyone, but we're just going to love and lay down our life for the other person, where we're going to put them ahead of ourselves. Father, I pray that you help each of us develop this kind of love for each other. In our marriages, of course, but even in any relationship, that we could learn to love people the way that you loved us. And Father, I pray for any person that's here this morning or watching this message online, and they might say, I've never experienced that kind of love. I don't know what it's like to receive love without any sort of expectation or anything in return or any demands. It always feels like there's something required of me if I receive something. Father, I thank you that you gave us the example of how to love by sending Jesus to the cross for us, that he paid the price for us without requiring anything of us, that he gave it to us as a free offering, a free gift, that all you ask is for us to use our faith to receive the gift that you've given us. And so, Father, I pray for each and every person here this morning. And if they're here and if anyone's here and they haven't prayed to receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and they haven't received of that free gift of love that you've given us, I pray that they'll do it this morning. So if you're here today or if you're watching online and you've never prayed to make Jesus Christ the Lord and Savior of your life, I want you to pray this prayer with me, because this is a very simple prayer, but it's what brings us into the kingdom of heaven. It's what gives us the experience of the God kind of love. And to give that kind of love to your spouse, you first have to receive it from God. So if that's you and you want to pray to make Jesus Lord and Savior of your life, say this after me. Say, Father God, I come to you in the name of your Son Jesus. I confess Jesus is my Lord and my Savior. I believe that He died, was buried, and was raised from the dead. Thank you for saving me. From this day to my last day, I turn my back on sin, and from this day to my last day, I'll live for you with all of my heart. In Jesus' name. And if you believe it, say amen. Amen. Well, if you prayed that prayer, whether it's for the first time or you're recommitting your life to the Lord, today is a brand new day for you. I pray that this message has helped you. I hope it helps in all of your relationships, but especially if you're married or you're getting married, you want to be married, to learn to just selflessly put someone ahead of yourself. It'll change the dynamic of any relationship, but that's how you learn to have that's how you have a happy marriage, when it's no longer compromising and back and forth. You get your way on Monday, I get mine on Tuesday. It's a matter of like, no, I'm always going to put you ahead of me. And I'm not saying that it's super easy. It's not. But when you do that, the rewards are just exponential. And so you'll be reaping those rewards the rest of your married life. So I hope that today's message was a blessing to you. In closing, we're going to give everyone an opportunity to invest in God's kingdom. If you want to do that, just follow the instructions coming on the screen. You can give with cash or check. If you want to, you can raise your hand if you need an offering envelope. And we're constantly praying for your continued prosperity and blessing, that God is bringing increase to you. And we thank you for your continued generosity.
Yeah, and I also have just one quick testimony from the Valentine's party this past Friday. We just simply had the screen up there for student sponsorship, and right at the end when someone was leaving, they said anonymously that they wanted to donate to sponsor 2 students for the next semester. And we're just like totally blown away by the Lord's goodness, and that people are wanting to give into that. So if the Lord is leading you in any way to be a blessing for student sponsorship, I can't wait for the next semester to be able to say these are how many students that we were able to sponsor from that. So you can just put the Gospel Collaborative on your envelope or through Tithely.
Actually put student sponsorship.
Student sponsorship.
So in Tithely, there's a drop down for student sponsorship if you want. It doesn't have to be a whole sponsorship. It can be part or more, whatever you want to do. Or if you want to give with cash or check, just put student sponsorship in the memo on your envelope or on your check, and we'll make sure that goes to that. So next semester, we're going to have a bunch of kids that get to come that maybe wouldn't have been able to come, but now we're able to say, hey, we want to take care of that for you so that you can come. And so we're excited for that. So again, we're praying for your continued blessing, and let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for each seed that's sown into your kingdom, that it produces a harvest, that it produces a reward. We thank you that, as your word says, that you're making us rich in every way so that we can be generous on every occasion. We thank you that as we give from a place of sincere love for you from our heart, that you do what your word says. You'll supply all of our needs according to your riches and glory. And we thank you. We give you the praise, the credit, and the glory for it in Jesus' wonderful name. And if you believe it, say amen. Let's give with a glad heart. We love you all. Thank you so much for being here. And if you know someone that could benefit from these messages, bring them out next week. And we hope to see you again real soon.